How many years of game design has gone into Samira? Despite a 47% win rate according to OP.gg, the champion has been all the buzz since her release, with people putting up clips of the amount of insane damage that she can output and complaining about her being contender for being most broken champion on release thus far. The statements put up by the design team express their guiding principles in releasing new champions being long-term balanced. There's been much debate about this champion as well, with a Twitter thread from LVC caster Ender sharing his thoughts on the community reaction to his new champions. Here's my take on it. The last time Riot released such a complex champion to such community backlash was Aphelios. But the 200 years meme continued to stick with the champion as people counted up the centuries of game design experience every time he popped off in a team fight. The journey of nerves and where Aphelios ended up tells an interesting story of how Riot might have seen Aphelios and the release approach as a good champion design and release strategy for such complex champions. The text in Samira's passive has 1,671 characters and 281 words, compared to Jin, who holds second place with 175 words and 888 characters in his passive. And that is a whopping increase in the amount of information that needs to be taken in through the text medium. Of course, the comparisons to Dr. Mundo's simple passive that consists of 17 words and less than 100 characters draws about a quick laugh. But this increasing complexity is a luxury that we are able to afford by being in the genre of a game that is now over a decade old by now. Things that were not intuitive in the past are more intuitive now. Simple mechanics such as camera control, resetting auto attacks, and even how to start a step and understanding the concept of itemization for damage accordingly. To somebody else who's not trained, it might be unthinkable that buying a sword would actually let you shoot with more damage. Visual intuition, however, has been a big part of what has allowed League of Legends to be so successful in the crowded mobile market. The WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get nature of champions, and having most abilities be self-apparent and telegraphed by a certain degree has been what smooths the learning curve and makes League of Legends accessible to people. There's no such thing as counting frames, no hitbox priorities, and every time you die, you could see the source of it most of the time. At least that was the case until they released Zoe at the end of Season 7. Everything started and finished within your screen, so you have some basic idea of camera control. Still, for a champion like Zoe, she was telegraphed enough and people knew what was coming, and over time, they learned not to stand next to the walls. Aphelios, however, kind of broke this rule. The champion's design was aiming to break regular conventions around the game and have 5 different modes to operate from, named after 5 different weapon types: Crescendum, Infernum, Calibrum, Severum, and Gravitum, I believe. The immediate comparison was to Dota's Invoker in trying to create a combolicious champion. Now, the problem with this champion's design was that it strayed away from the what you see is what you get kind of design principle. People didn't know what was about to hit them. Well, for the case of Invoker, you can see what elements were being invoked, and that gave you a good idea of what would be coming soon. However, when Aphelios was first released, you couldn't say the same for him. He had a sniper rifle or he had a little dagger in his hand, and all of a sudden, boom, mass AoE crowd control would come flying your way. Now, aside from the juiced up numbers that seem to be part of the release strategy in compensating for players needing a learning curve to access these champions, the lack of visual intuition as to what Aphelios did was the core issue behind the problems the champion was having. The number of "that is effing BS" moments went up as players experienced negative feedback in the most frustrating manner, the kind where they did not know what was coming, and even worse, what they can do against it. The fix for that, aside from his numbers being consistently tweaked down, was to provide visual quality of life indicators for players to get a good idea of what guns he was having and what weapons in the rotation would be up next. For the numbers to eventually tuned down, being able to see what guns he was holding and what gun was next gave people a better idea and provided much more clarity that helped people learn and understand what was happening with this champion. It helped as well that his presence in pro play and being so dominant put him in the spotlight, so that anybody who followed esports and had an idea that this champion was meant to be competitive allowed them to learn and adapt to this champion much more quickly. Still, it took over a good half a year for people to figure out how to deal with this champion properly. Now, Aphelios, while he is no longer at the forefront of the meta, he can still be described as a niche filler. I would definitely say that stronger than Kog'Maw, but like how you pick up Kog'Maw late in the draft when you see multiple tanks shooting in the artillery battery type champions such as Senna or an Azir, Aphelios has become the weapon of choice in scenarios where you want to answer multiple bruisers. Their range limited, and this is due to him having auto-targeting abilities. I do believe it's from the turret as well as from the Crescendum Q that prevent his DPS momentum from being disrupted. So against the likes of Aurelia or Renekton, champions that want to get into his zone of influence, Aphelios can be one of the most effective champions at beating out these bruisers. Now, this set precedent for designers to handle complexity and introduce overtuned complex champion, allow for people to adapt and provide a visual quality of life to help for outplay and pronounce weaknesses more clearly. So eventually they will try to relegate these champions down into niches through a combination of these things, teaching people how the champion works, letting players adapt to him, and once people have figured him out, they tune down the numbers to a point where the champion is no longer overbearing in the metagame itself. Before we move on to Samira, if you've liked my content so far, do drop this video a like and do hit the subscribe button. I will be giving insights on roles, my experiences coaching, and my amateur thoughts on champion design as we continue to debate champions like Samira and Yuumi still has been kind of untested as well. But let's talk about Samira. Samira suffers from the same problems that Aphelios had from the onset. Loaded amounts of text, very bloated amounts of text that require extensive reading and comprehension to figure out what does this champion exactly do. And there's a certain like a visual intuition as to what will be coming next. Most of the time you look at the champions, okay, there's Q, there's W, there's E, there's R, right? You know that there's 4 champions and a passive ability. But because of the multimodal style of Samira and the fact that she combos up and moves very quickly, it can be hard to tell what's coming next. Now, a combo style champion isn't new to League of Legends, right? You can come up with a good combo style League of Legends champion, and it has been done in the past. If we wanted to do something that just stacks up a counter, right? This already has been done. Tristana embodies this in the simplest form. You land your explosive charge, you hit them multiple times, and once you get 4 stacks, you get a reset. And you knew what the abilities were, you could see what was coming, and it's easy to understand both from an execution point of view and being on the receiving end. Now, Lucian is another great example of something that's a little bit more complex, but this is something that rewards very in-your-face kind of playstyle, right? That rewards the thrill-seeking kind of playstyle, where once it reworked him, it made it about being able to reset the cooldowns on your E, being able to get 2 taps of your passive in as much as possible, and being able to cycle in your abilities, find the right opportunities to get the starter step auto attacks off, to get the additional dash in for the team fights. And this was the mobility tool being the reward for being able to duck and weave in a fight that let Lucian be such a strong factor, and now we see him being played quite a fair bit in the mid lane as well. Now, for the case of Samira, perhaps this was a case of top-down design where they wanted to mimic a particular style from a certain genre of games, and I think that in the Champion Spotlight video, they even referenced it, like making a joke about it being double, oh wait, no, it's Inferno Trigger instead, right? With the reference, of course, being towards the Devil May Cry series, which is a hack and slash type of game where you want to rack up a certain combo score, and it rewards you for being able to keep up such combo meters as well. Now, while this is an interesting concept to explore, the last time they drew reference from the idle game genre, they gave us the territory with Yuumi, another champion whose general playability and enjoyability was not reflected by win rates in solo queue. Now, still, none of these champions needed the abomination attacks that Samira has at the moment. While as strong as they were during their heyday, allowed for people to appreciate strength without feeling utterly cheesed up by sunlight and the essay of text that they now had to read in a new interface, which would be a browser, outside of the game, and slowly figure out how that may or may not have been the factor behind their death. This doesn't even include the part where they start to intuit solutions to having contemplated Samira. So once again, you get killed by this champion, and you have to start to wonder, right, like which parts of the mechanics are allowing this champion to outplay you or be able to function in this way that makes it so strong. And having to navigate the interface of text, which is not something that's visual, it's not something that's appearing on your screen, it's not something that is, it seems simple to just read something, but to interact with the interface, especially in such a messy system, where most of the time you want to just glance through over something, okay, these are the important parts, and then you look at this, it's three separate paragraphs of text within the passive itself. It's difficult for people to process, much less find exactly which part of it and try to figure out what's going on over here. Now, there will definitely be ways for people to beat Samira, but while we have an arguable successful case for this new age of bloated design, seeing such lines of text once a year might be too much for me. Now, how often? So, Riot so far, in terms of what's been released throughout the entire year, they released Senna, which I would think that in terms of power level might be actually be stronger than Aphelios, but simply because of how intuitive the champion is, it's kind of what you see is what you get, right? You had Senna, you had Set, you had Yon, you had Lilia, all being released, and I think on release all of these champions were very modern kids, and they bring a certain level of power with them, and only Aphelios got this flag simply because of the sheer amount of complexity that came with his kit as well. Now, how often should Riot dabble releasing in such complicated new champions? They seem to be doing this like once every year. But if you ask me, my personal preference will only be once every 200 years. Now with that, Samira and Yon, the two most recently champions, they will not be available for play in the 2020 World Championship, which will happen this Friday, starting with the playing stage. Get hyped for Worlds, it's gonna be a banger.